name is Kim Woodworth, and I have the great pleasure of being the Executive Director for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. Just a few housekeeping items before we get going. You have entered in on mute, but we don't want you to be muted the whole time. This is an opportunity to really engage with our speakers today. Please ask questions, put them in the chat section or raise your hand. This is a very informal environment, so please feel free that you can speak up. We also, if you have any questions in this webinar, please send them to EDCC's administrator, Bobby. She's putting her email address into the chat section. We'll also follow up with a video from today's webinar, as well as the PowerPoints and any additional resources that have been given out today through an email. So you'll probably receive those early next week, and then we will post them to our website. And finally, we are, we have launched a major social media campaign. I hope that you guys are following along. We have so many people this year that are really celebrating economic development in their communities. So please follow us. But in order for us to know that you're doing that, we need you to put in a hashtag. So follow EDC at CO as well as downtown COLO. And then hashtag. So the Colorado campaign is the CO Econ Dev Week 24. So that's how we are, breaking out just the Colorado celebrations. And then IEDC's hashtag, which is everybody in the world, hashtag Econ Dev Week. So make sure you get those in to every post that you do. For those of you who are new to us, EDCC is a statewide industry association that supports economic development efforts across the state of Colorado. We connect our communities, our members, and our partners to high-quality educational opportunities and trusted resources, and advocate for sound policies and programs that support a vibrant economy and enhance quality of life for all of Colorado. DCI, our partners at Downtown Colorado, Inc., are committed to building downtowns that are prosperous, equitable, creative, and welcoming. Their work focuses on establishing community-wide partnerships to facilitate and encourage community engagement for increased economic vitality. DCI provides assistance to Colorado downtowns, commercial districts, main streets, rural communities, and town centers through advisory services, educational events, advocacy and information, downtown financing mechanisms, as well as their Colorado Challenge program. We are thrilled. EDCC is thrilled to announce that early bird registration is now open for our Drive Lead Succeed conference that's happening October 13th through 16th. This is a chance to save lots of money on your registration. We will be in Beaver Creek this year, which we're very excited about. Also, please consider sponsoring this conference. The help that you bring to this conference brings us even more resources, high profile speakers that can really help us with the work that we're doing. But that sponsorship is very important to us, as we are a nonprofit, and it costs money to put these types of events on. Also, we are opening up our nominations for the Eddie Awards early this year. So please help us in getting those nominations in by July. We are planning a very special event this year, very different from years past, and we just need the time to really plan for it. And I will give you all a little hint. If we're in Beaver Creek, we would have to have the best 80s ski party, right? So we're hoping everybody will come out with their onesies, with their awesome sunglasses, whatever, to really celebrate the 80s there in Beaver Creek. Bobby is putting links into the chat section for you to click through. And then also don't miss our basic economic development course that's happening June 10th through the 14th. We are at the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce. The Denver Metro EDC, Metro Denver EDC is hosting us. Registration is open, and we do have scholarships and travel stipends for that. And this is a substantial introduction to the theory of and fundamentals of comprehensive economic development. So if you haven't taken it, it is a great course. And I'd like to have Bill do a quick highlight for Downtown Colorado, Inc. Bill?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. We have a ton of programming coming up this year. We have multiple webinars and in-person events throughout the summer and fall. But in particular, we are starting our second cohort of the year of our Colorado Challenge program. And specifically related to the topic of today's discussion, part of the Challenge program's enhancements this year is that we're working with CSU and the Ready Center there, the Rural Economic Development Center, and focusing on being able to help build community capacity around economic development, being able to measure that and chart the impacts of our work and your work in your communities to see measurable change. So if you're into the kind of ideas that we're talking about here today and you'd like to learn more about the assessment, you can take the assessment for free with the link online, or potentially participate in the Colorado Challenge program also for free. We're taking applications and interest forms now. So thank you, Bobby, for putting the link in the chat, and we'd love to see you all participate.
Thanks, Bill. All right, now without further ado, let's move on to today's webinar. Numbers are more than mere digits. They serve as the foundation for impactful stories. Whether you're weaving a fictional tale or presenting real-world data, effectively integrating numbers into your storytelling can bring depth, clarity, and effectively integrating numbers into your story. Learn how to harness the power of data storytelling to communicate insights from data sets using compelling narratives and visualizations. We will be dissecting the components of effective data storytelling and equipped you with the skills to transform raw numbers into captivating stories that resonate with your audience. With that, I would like to introduce you to today's speakers. Caroline has been a marketing and communications professional in the Denver metro area for more than 30 years. A graduate from CU Boulder, she specializes in strategic marketing and place branding, and may have worked with some of the communities on this call during her time at Atlas Advertising. Prior to joining Adams County in 2022, she spent 7 years with the city of Westminster as an economic development marketing specialist. And Ethan is a highly skilled professional with over a decade of experience collaborating with a diverse clientele ranging from entrepreneurs to Fortune 500 companies. Holding an MBA from the University of Florida, he maintains a commitment to staying informed on the latest developments in economics and policies, ensuring a forward-thinking approach to economic development. With a comprehensive background, Ethan has successfully executed initiatives that attract investments, generate employment opportunities, and foster economic prosperity. With that, please give Ethan and Carolyn a big round of applause and warm welcome on Zoom, as we all do. Ethan, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you everyone else for joining as well. I will let you have a chance to see Caroline as well. So right here in the room.
We're in the same room.
All right. So with that, I'll go ahead and do the standard Zoom thing here of sharing my screen and going through the whole, can everybody see it?
Yeah.
And everything. We got a thumbs up there. All right, great. So as sort of a grounding, we'll start out with the general sense of data and turning it into visualizations and stories. I think broadly, all of us would kind of understand that data is sort of the cornerstone of economic development. There's just so much out there, but you can use things to analyze your community, to inform your strategic plans. You can use your data to measure your own organizational performance. You can use it to market your community. You can share it with your business community so they can make better informed decisions. And then on the story side of things, that's what really connects people and creates engagement. So let's see, is it working? Oops. Can't have a presentation of that issue, right? So broadly, I would just jump in and say, what kind of makes a good data story? Now, there's probably a lot more than just what I'm showing here, but in terms of a basic sort of framework that you can look at from our perspective, you're going to start with kind of your data. And when I say good data, I mean it should be relevant to the story you're telling and to your audience. And I would say it should also be credible. So it can't be stuff you overheard on the street somewhere. It should come from a reputable source. I say for visuals, they should be effective visuals. I know everyone wants to kind of do fancy things. There's a place for that. And that can capture attention and everything, but sometimes even just a table of data that you have can actually be the most effective way of showing it. So you just want to, there's a balance, there's an art and a science to kind of what you're doing. So you have to balance that out. And then I would say the narrative as sort of two components, being both your overall framework for the story that you're trying to tell, but also the actual just basic text that you're going to incorporate into your visualizations. And you might think, well, if you're just going from basic spreadsheet numbers and kind of things like that, can you really make an effective story out of it? I would just highlight that luckily for us, a lot of data that we're going to talk about is probably similar, whether it be industry or our populations or things in our communities. Those are all actually the people and things making your community work, or things that are affecting people in their day-to-day lives. So making those numbers engaging to people isn't really as complicated as you think. This is a visual presentation, so I thought I'd start with a little example. If you take kind of your most basic, say, time series chart or something like that, if you do a day planner, maybe you've seen it's just like a row of hours during the day, and you would fill in whatever you're doing. That's about as basic as you can get. So how could you make that into like a compelling sort of visualization if you're trying to tell the story of your day or your week? And this is sort of a creative way of doing that, right? This incorporates kind of all the different components, right? It transfers the data or the number part into a visual. The narrative is there in very basic format in that it's telling you how to interpret what's happening with this data. And again, it's also very effective at it. So I think anyone can, we probably all had this experience at some point that we can relate to. So again, very broadly, what we're going to go through is just kind of touch on some of these points about clarifying things about your audience, delivering your data research that you're doing for them in an effective way, and then actual tips for sort of visualizations. This as a topic probably couldn't even be covered with an entire day course. So for us to try to do it in a short form webinar isn't really feasible, but we want to give you some general ideas, tips, guidelines, and then we've interspersed a lot of tools or resources for you that should be really helpful to get you going or give you almost a how-to and kind of plug and play on these things so that you can get right into it, because this is the kind of thing that isn't inaccessible to anybody, regardless of what your skill level or where you're coming in at. So very broadly, of course, I'm taking this from an economic development kind of perspective, but I think we're all sort of related to that. Your audience could be any number of these sort of categories of people or multiple ones put together. I mean, I've talked to a number of these varying groups in the last month, so these are people we consistently engage with. The idea here is just you're telling a story, so you want to have a sense of who your audience is going to be first, because that's going to be a critical aspect in how you're preparing your numbers for the presentation, for your visual presentation. So think about your audience. You got to remember everyone's got different biases, different perspectives coming in, maybe different asks that they're looking for. So you just want to try to preempt that. Think about what their bias might be, their ability to understand what you're saying. How many acronyms I'm sure we all run into day to day. Try not to do those if you can't. You got to think, do people want stuff very accurate, very specific information, or are they looking for something that you can get at in a short period of time? Us as a government agency, we have access to certain amounts of information that help inform the stories we're telling, but we might not be able to really share that across different audiences. So you got to kind of consider how you put that out there. But at the end of the day, you're trying to create a visually appealing, well-designed, sort of audience-focused, and when I say credible research, if you can do that with your data visualizations, you're helping not just yourself, but your whole community. So if you're working at the state level and you do that, someone in a local area could pull from that. Or if you're a small rural community and you do something really well, that can that can still be used at a more regional level to kind of tell everybody's story. And then just broadly, there's a lot of different sort of story formats you can use. This is one that I borrowed from sort of journalism. So if you have any sort of journalism or advertising kind of training, these kind of things come up. But I just use this as a general framework to kind of guide what information I need to provide people. So it works in reverse. You know, you kind of give the most important information and then build out your details from there. So let's see. So let's go more into like how you're actually pulling your data and providing it out there and doing the research. I would say, you know, top line, what you're trying to do with any sort of story is develop an agreed upon set of facts or your data from which you're helping someone make a decision or you're informing them. That's essentially what your story is. And I put persuade there in parentheses because any communication that we do or that anyone is doing is in some way designed to persuade. But you got to kind of be a little careful with that when you're presenting things this way. You don't want to mislead people even inadvertently. So you don't want to, I don't think anyone would cherry pick any data, but this kind of goes to what I think was talked about on Tuesday. If you were in that webinar telling an authentic story, I'm very positive about Adams County and I would love to tell you all the great things about it. But if I'm only telling you like the positive sort of things, I'm not really giving you a sort of useful story in some ways. And then you also just want to think, you don't want to, sometimes it can be just a simple ask. Maybe someone wants to know about what's going on with the labor force in your area, but you don't want to, or a specific industry, so you don't want to provide information that sort of tells people just what they want to hear. So that's just kind of a line you got to walk. So basic 3-step part of doing that is, you know, in light of what your audience is, kind of understanding what relevant data is. Do you really understand either what the ask to you is or what you want to communicate? What kind of context needs to be added in? Because a lot of times your data is going to just come in big spreadsheets or in big forms. So you got to kind of provide additional information on it. Again, a lot of your time might be spending interpreting and kind of validating that your data is okay. Are you trying to answer something at a more really local level? So like at a neighborhood block level, can you even get information for that? It might not be available, so you have to kind of balance that out. But the biggest thing is going to be explaining your data. So any patterns or key points in there as part of your story, it's entirely your responsibility to explain what the data says, sometimes what it doesn't say, but it's not the audience's responsibility to be able to necessarily pull that out. So, you know, as part of that, you're going to be pulling from a lot of different sources. You know, I won't belabor the point, but there's a lot of, you know, the big 3 kind of statistical agencies, Bureau of Labor Statistics, any of the census programs, Bureau of Economic Analysis. I'm sure everyone's somewhat familiar with those, but not all of that is going to always work directly for your area. So you probably have a local business retention and expansion program, hopefully. If not, create one and start getting surveys and questions out to your local community. Now you might put that together and not technically have like a statistically valid sample size. But if you have a pretty good coverage with your local business community, I think using that data and then layering it with some of the broader regional things can get you to valid conclusions in the information you can put out there. With all that said, you know, I'm not just going to read you bullet points here, but you're going to run into kind of sort of consistent things, even between large statistical agencies. Not everyone uses the same methodology. Just kind of know what you're talking about, or always add additional clarification to anything you're putting out there. Census Bureau has certain industry information, doesn't completely align with the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics kind of looks at some employment or labor force information too. So when you're pulling multiple sources, just make sure you're sort of clarifying on those. Again, you're going to run into a lot if you're from smaller, your more rural communities, you're going to have probably less drill down of information available from some of the bigger areas. But again, you can do that, fill those gaps with sort of local collection, or there's statistical methods to kind of do it. That's probably outside of the scope of certain people's capabilities, but you could always, of course, pay somebody to help fill in some of those gaps.
Ethan, we had a question in the chat section from Alicia, and I think this is very perfect for what you're talking about. But they're hoping to do some surveys with their local businesses. Do you have any suggestions or templates or actual surveys that they can help emulate?
I don't have any in this presentation. I could certainly follow up with this afterwards. My recommendation would be looking at things from like the International Economic Development Council. They have a whole course on business retention expansion, and they give a very sort of exhaustive survey in there that you could use as a template, or you could cut certain parts out that are more relevant for you. But that's what I would suggest for that.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah. And again, sort of all that is to say, you need to really explain your research or any data that you pull and present to people. You're going to spend probably a lot more time than you think kind of analyzing and looking at things. But at the end of the day, you might only present people with one chart. So make sure you're effectively explaining what's in there, and what, in a lot of ways, sometimes it's important to say what's not in there. And then this is the first sort of set of tools or resources I hope is very helpful for everyone, because everything I said, you may say, there's two of us in our organization, or none of us in our organization have a background in any sort of data analysis or working with things. Maybe you just don't like working in Excel. That's fine too. So there's a lot, you go to some of these agencies, they just give you a Excel or CSV file of a bunch of data. Maybe you don't know what to do or don't want to do anything with it. And in that realm, a lot of these resources and sites here kind of pre-form sort of do it for you. So any of these, I would just say, come back and reference this and click on them and go through them and see what's applicable to your community. There's a lot in there where they give you very basic charts already together. They aggregate things, they transform some of the data and clean it up, so you don't have to spend time doing that. So then, since we're here to talk about visualization, let's just move on to that topic. Again, I can't really give you total prescriptives on what to do, but to stick to the theme, when you first go to do a visualization, always think about your audience. So this is just a bad example for this audience, because I don't think anyone is probably familiar with soil chemistry. What I'm getting at here is, like, a complicated kind of chart is fine, but you need to think about the audience that you're presenting it to. This totally works in some domains, and others, it's not going to work at all. So that's like your first sort of frame you should sort of place on, after you've sort of aggregated your data and know what you want to talk about. And then the second part is, of course, just what your actual data is. Are you talking about categories of things? Are you showing a relationship across time? Is there a geographical component? I'd love, again, to tell you what you should do here, but there's not really a right way to do it. There's definitely wrong ways to do it, which I'll get to in a second. I think is more useful. So instead of trying to belabor the point on some of this, I thought I'd just give you some additional resources. Again, you can go back and reference these slides later, but this is one that you can download and print out, put on your office wall. I'm sure everyone will want to do that. But when it gives a very, very easy walkthrough. If you're talking about, am I showing a change over time? Am I showing a ranking of things within my community? And it gives you a number of different sort of ways you can visually present that in a chart, and a little synopsis of when you might want to do that. And then second to that, just bookmark this site and use it. Again, it's very easy kind of plug and play walkthrough. So you don't have to overthink what you're doing. If you're going from say a numeric value, you can kind of just walk down through the chart based on some additional information you have, and it will give you a ready-made list of potential ways you can visualize that data in a chart. So hopefully that saves you some legwork and headaches. But again, you can see from these charts, there's a number of ways to kind of do any of these. So it really is going to kind of be who your audience is, what you're trying to communicate, that's going to determine that. But of course, like I said, there are ways you can do it wrong. There's not really a right way to do it, but there's some ways that you can get it wrong. So I just wanted to jump to some very high level general examples and rules of thumb that you can use. So if you're doing basic line or bar charts, one thing you want to think about is how you're scaling that chart. So the thing, if you don't know anything else, just always start your scale at 0. And why? Well, the chart on the left, the picture on the left and the one on the right, they're showing you the same thing. Very different impressions if you just casually glance at it. I don't know if the one on the left was designed to be deliberately misleading, but it sort of is. So this is the sort of thing, though, that can also inadvertently happen if you're using a software. You put your data together in a chart. So you use that guide from earlier and you make your chart. Depending on the data you have, your program might just scale it however. So you're going to need to think about it contextually a little bit and say, what are people really gathering from this? Am I misleading anyone? Am I adequately capturing what's going on here? And then second, if you start to read any of this, and I hope you do read more into this, when you start doing that, you'll learn very quickly across the board for data visualization. Everybody hates pie charts. I don't know where that came from, but trust me, you're going to see everybody say, don't use pie charts. So just save yourself time and don't use a pie chart. Some of it comes from just the way the human brain processes things, judging angles and sort of, if you're trying to categorize across these 3 pie charts, in terms of volume or how they relate, it's not very clear. Now, of course, if you didn't have letters, you had numbers in there, that might help a little bit more. But looking at it this way gives one impression, where if you just transform it, the same data in a bar chart, another simple format, this is 100 times more understandable and easy to know what you're talking about. So in general, again, just don't use pie charts. And then again, kind of broadly in statistics, certain things that can happen in various ways when you're trying to present things visually, just sort of keep these things in mind. So small sample size effect just really happens when you're talking about a small sample. So if you're in a small rural community, that could be, your population is a lot smaller, so you're more likely to see an event sort of show a really high or low extreme variation that might not be significant at all. It's just kind of what's happening. So the same thing if you're talking about a subgroup from a larger population, the swings there could just be higher or lower. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're taking your data out. Percentages versus percentage points. I put this in here because this comes up a lot when people might take your data and put it into a news story or thing like that, that things can get misunderstood. So it's just you kind of using the right term. So the difference between 1% and 2%, say you have 1% unemployment, you go to 2% unemployment, that's a 1 percentage point change, maybe significant, maybe not. But percentage wise, that's like 100% difference, right? So people could refer to it very differently, and that's an extreme example, but in other cases it could skew things. A lot of that came up kind of back during COVID in terms of effectiveness of masks or incidence rates in the way they were kind of capturing the data. That made things very, very confusing. And then ecological fallacy. This is one that you're probably not going to totally be able to avoid, but to provide you the exact definition for it, it essentially happens when somebody looks at your group level data and draws a conclusion about individuals from it. So the example here is sort of, as a whole, a state with a high educational achievement tend to also have lower poverty rates. What you can't say from that is that an individual within that state that has high educational achievement will not experience poverty because the group level data doesn't provide you that individual sort of breakdown. You know, I know that's probably not entirely clear as I could make it, but it's more what you're trying to do is you're going to be providing a lot of data sort of at aggregate or population group levels in your community. You want to think about when you're putting that out there, how somebody could read into that something that's not there. And you can't police people's minds and the assumptions they're going to make on what you show them, especially when you have a diverse audience group, but you can sort of label your access or provide annotations to your charts that sort of put guide rails on what conclusions people will draw from what you're presenting. And now at the very least, you can say ecological fallacy in your next team meeting or something and sound super smart or whatever. I hear that works for webinars too. We'll find out. But that's saying a lot of things to basically say what. So again, it's a visual, we're talking about visual presentations. So let's do a visual example that kind of hopefully ties all of this together. So I'll give you a second to sort of look at this picture and sort of think about what are you supposed to understand from this, or what could you take from this, or can you understand what's going on here? I mean, you can sort of see it's labeled not entirely clearly. Different colors don't kind of match up. What's the relationship between the pie and the graph over here? And of course, it's a pie chart, which we just said don't use pie charts, so that's already a problem. But there's a lot going on here that's not clear. So if you think about what's the narrative here, there's not really anything guiding you to understand what's going on. The visualization isn't very effective because it's sort of confusing on colors. It's not clear how things relate. And then if you think about the data, we sort of have to assume that it's credible data because it's part of the example, but there's clearly some different categories of data, and it's not really clear how they're relevant to one another. So just thinking of that, how would you make that better? How would you tell a story with this? This, I think, kind of captures all of that a little bit better. Very clear top line. It's telling you this is what you're supposed to get from this information. Then it sort of reiterates it again. The visuals are a little bit more effective in that they've broken them out into smaller groups, so you're not overly burdened trying to dig things apart. They're categorized a little bit better by number size and everything. Again, there's clear narrative kind of telling you what you're supposed to be getting from each set of data. There is some linkage between the colors on the bar chart on the left and the ones on the right. So this, you think about the three kind of parts for a data story. This kind of puts them all together in a much more understandable format. And then sort of as through this in here, again, you might think, because this one is very, very much something that you could pull out of Excel if you just highlighted some data and said, insert recommended chart. Maybe not everybody's doing that all the time, but it's not really the most user-friendly way. So you could easily end up with something like this. That's not going to be helpful. You could certainly build the second example in Excel, but again, it's not really designed for that. So these are some free tools and resources that you can use that would allow you to create a very nice visual story without, again, needing to spend a ton of time figuring out how to do that. They're all, again, these are free resources you can use. They're all very user-friendly. So anybody, even if you're not familiar, in some cases, you could just drop a spreadsheet into the thing and it will essentially organize and help start the design process for you. And then, so again, to kind of reiterate and wrap things up, again, kind of start with your audience. You're going to be tailoring your data and visualization to them. Make sure you're choosing kind of the right chart to do that. Make sure you're being very clear in sort of your story or your narrative about what's supposed to be taken out of the chart, what's important about it. I don't know if everybody was on the Tuesday webinar, but I know it was brought up at that time, you know, the sort of concept of, well, you can rip off and duplicate. So again, if you are brand new to this or doing things, that can be an effective way to kind of start. You see what another community is doing really well. You know, you can sort of take their visual inspiration from them and putting your community's information. I would instead call it borrow and educate, right? It's a different story. You know, you're borrowing from somebody, and you're going to educate your audience with that data, and then ultimately seek to sort of learn from anything you're getting from anyone else, and then create something unique for your community. Again, this is going to be an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. And you can't sit here. You're not going to take a one-day course even to and be an expert at this. So kind of, I mean, the data that's out there for your community, it's telling a story. So whether it's the story you want told or it's a complete story is kind of on us as economic developers or community engagement people or anyone within that domain to kind of go in and make sure it's being done effectively in the way we want. And that's mostly what I had. I'll stop and actually pass it to Caroline to get to probably the more interesting and real world examples of things.
Hi, folks. Yeah, so I learned a lot actually just sitting with Ethan going through his presentation the other day, because I am on the other side. I'm the person who actually tells the story, but data is something that scares me along with design as well. So I know that a lot of the organizations on this call today don't have a full team at their disposal to help them with things. So I think what Ethan provided with these free resources, with these links, I think that's one way to get started. And then hopefully I can take you to that next level, giving you a couple examples of what we've done in Adams County. And the reason why you want to tell your story. We as economic developers wear many, many hats. One of them should be a storyteller, and a lot of the times we just don't have time for that. But the real benefit of telling your story pays off in the end. You want to be able to show, report these measurable outcomes. We are all held to this level of transparency where we have to tell what is actually happening behind the scenes. So this is your opportunity to do so. We want to show the return on your investment. I think a lot of times there's so many intangibles that go into economic development, but this is the opportunity to show the real tangibles that come out from your efforts. Highlighting key projects. Not only does highlighting key projects show the effort and all the investment that has gone into things, it's also a great attraction tool as well. You can show, site selectors or other folks coming into the community. This is something that we have done, we have built in our community. Again, educating your audience on what is economic development. We are not quite, to use my friend's reference, the Chandler Bing job, but which is also technically called statistical analysis and data reconfiguration, if you're a Friends fan. But a lot of people have a hard time explaining exactly what it is that we do as economic developers. And so this is a really great opportunity to educate folks in this realm and let them know and see the whole process. And finally, it's a really good time to start a dialogue about what has happened in your community, what is moving, what are your plans for moving forward, and really getting folks involved in this dialogue. So like Ethan, audience is key to everything. You have to figure out what you're trying to convey and who your audience is. And I'm going to give you two examples that we have produced in Adams County and how they're different, but they both use data sets and tell different stories. And then also to what do you want to tell them versus what do they want to hear? And again, that doesn't go to the transparency or providing the rosy picture, but really it's a term that I learned a long time ago from a professor. It's called what is everybody's favorite radio station, is called WIFM, What's in It For Me. And so essentially you're trying to make that connection is what is the impact? What is the story that they can tell maybe your commissioners or your electeds could tell their constituents on how this is impacting them. So it's not just putting the information out there, it's actually making the connection of what's in it for me, how does this impact me, and how can I make a connection? And then two other things we want to look at is format and frequency. So is this a full-blown, multi-page annual report we're doing? Is it a one-sheeter overview of, a quarterly review? And then frequency, again, that goes to the idea of, are we going to do an annual report? I'll get into some tips and tricks in a couple slides here, but you'll see where frequency can actually be your friend if you do something more often, because it helps you build the annual report in the end. So 2 examples. First one we're going to start with is an impact report that we did in Adams County. Our audience on this was mostly internal. They were stakeholders or commissioners. And the reason behind it was this is really a newly created department in the last several years. And there had been some, staff turnover. There had been obviously the COVID years. There had been us, trying to define this department, let the commissioners know the value of it, establish the identity. So it really is an annual impact report, but this needed to start with kind of almost a 3-year review of what has been going on and where we're planning on moving. The format we chose was obviously a digital PDF is always easy to put on your website, but we really did also want to do some printed pieces as well, something that they could carry around with them, reference back to and all that. And again, this is an annual impact report. Just some things that we thought about is setting the tone. I mean, there's so many different ways you can go. And one of the tips I will reference, but I'll reference it now, is the same thing. I don't use the word rip off and duplicate. I say inspire. So, go on the internet and get inspired by other people's reports or other people's documents. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be economic development. You could check annual reports for any other industry and just say, this is something that really inspires me. This is the direction we want to go. Do we want to have a letter from our director, or do we want to talk about the vision and the mission? And then we can start to get into like the imagery, photos. Are you going to do a lot of iconography? You're going to do some charts, obviously charts if you're talking about data sets. And then information to include. What we did in this chart, or excuse me, in this document was, again, a 3-year look back at what this department, why it was developed, why it was established, the major accomplishments, the incentives that were executed, the projects we've been working on, success stories, key data and stats, but also too what's coming next, because this is an annual tool that we provide. And so then we can say, coming up in this next year, we're going to be doing these things. These are the things on our plate. And then also to contact information. What I really mean by that is just more like the About Us section. This is a new department and there had been some staff turnover. So letting people know who the folks are, what their backgrounds are, how to reach them, and just really letting them know that, we're not just, economic development department, we're your partner in this. So moving on to tips and tricks, again, getting inspired. No one has really, we keep reinventing the wheel. There's really no brand new ideas out there. So why not just leverage the good ideas that are already out there? Another one too is the graphic on this page is actually from Esri. So if you've used the Esri tool at all, this graphic was generated by them. So you can see a lot of these tools are getting wise to the idea that they need to make their data a little bit more graphically appealing too. So they have the map, they actually have the, the iconography, you can plug in your own narrative. So really letting the tools do some of the work for you. How to collect your information throughout the year. If you're going to do an annual report, sometimes it was easy for us just to go back and look at what did we say to our constituents in our newsletters? What did we put on our social media? But also too, if you're doing like a weekly report or a monthly report or a quarterly report, these just then get funneled into that annual report at the end. So you might want to think about, maybe it's not just an annual report, maybe we're doing a monthly or a quarterly one-sheeter to keep our constituents and our stakeholders informed. Another example is stretching the story. And what I mean by that is we were working alongside North Glen when they brought Prost Brewery in to their new headquarter location there. We're all down in the weeds every day with this information. It's a story, for years and years, you're in on the first end of the deal, and then there's the groundbreaking, and then there's the build, and we think by the end people are tired of hearing about it, but actually they're not. We're the ones who are really hearing about the details day to day. So in one of our annual reports, we might have said, hey, great news, we're doing the groundbreaking. But even the next year, the story is still big news. Now we have the grand opening, now we have all these new jobs. So keep those stories going, keep the momentum going, because while it might feel like old news to you because you're dealing with it every day, it's really not old news to your stakeholders. We do have the advantage of a full communications team on our staff in terms of the design and graphics, but there's a lot of free tools out there using Canva for the design. As one example, Pictochart can help you with a lot of your infographics. Blended Cons, free icons left and right. I think plugging in icons, I mean, if you don't have an icon, are you really an economic developer? So I think knowing that there's all these free tools out there to use, you don't have to necessarily have a graphic designer on your staff. You can do a lot of this yourself, especially if you're just doing a simple one-sheeter and you want to make it look a little bit more appealing. Also, too, we ask a lot of times our partners, so whether it's businesses or developers that we're working with, to give us photos. We might not have the time or staff or means to go out and get these really cool photos, but they definitely want to show off their projects and they want to show off, their business. So we say, submit a photo to us, we will use it, and then that's done. And then also, again, the repurposing of your content. I think kind of the inbound and the outbound. So going back to your social media, going back to speeches, going back to what have you done in the past to then put it into this annual report, but then also too, repurposing that, taking the content from your annual report and using it as social media posts and inserting it into your speeches and using it when you're doing outreach. So that's the beauty of content. It should just be repurposed over and over and over again. And then one other example, and I'll wrap it up real quickly because I know we're running short on time, but this is a profile. So just same approach, but again, different audience, external audience, site selectors. What are we trying to convey? We were trying to do more data, demographics, differentiators. Same thing, this is an annual report. We want a digital PDF. We also printed it, but you'll see, this is where you really want to get to know your audience. So we're looking at maps, having people know exactly where you're located, doing comparative data so they can, because these site selectors, are looking at a lot of places around the country. And then also kind of calling out these differentiators in these short sound bites saying, we have strategic location, we're young and affordable. So really, again, it all goes back to audience. It all goes back to the information you're trying to convey. And it all goes back to there are resources out there to help you. Even if you don't have, a communication staff or you don't have the means to use a freelancer, there's a lot of tools out there that will help you get these end results. So I'm going to pass it back to Ethan because he's got more resources for you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on these real quick because presentation trick, I guess, saved the best for last. Again, everything we touched on, I think some of the tools you have, it's accessible. Anyone can get started and do this, but to do it well is going to be an ongoing learning process. So take this link that's here, bookmark it, spend some time on your weekends going through it. This is about as close as you're going to get to a how-to, quick reference, frequently asked question guide for anything we covered and even more. It's very comprehensive, but also sort of short form readable formats on pretty much any topic for data visualization. I mean, this will even drill down into your bar charts. Should you make your bars vertical or horizontal? I mean, it gets into the weeds on some of these things. But again, if you have materials from stuff you've done in the past, maybe walk through this and look at certain things and kind of see what you did right and what you could do better. Or if you have something new that's coming up again, or you're currently working on something, you can easily click in right into that topic and make sure you're not making any kind of little mistakes. So it should be your reference companion forever going forward as long as it's there. And then dashboards are a really big popular thing. I felt it was out of scope for us to kind of talk about, but just as quick reference, there's a couple ways you could sort of categorize a dashboard. A lot of visualization software will give you, they'll say, do you want to create a dashboard? So if you have no idea kind of what to put into one or think about, this is just a quick little reference for you to look at. And then again, for ongoing learning, some standard books that were out there that are very good. Even a podcast, if that's more your thing. There's plenty of data visualization experts out there. Hearing them in interview format is always very informative because there's always slightly different perspectives on things. And then, of course, the EDCC Knowledge Vault. Please check that out. There's a tremendous amount in there. They're always updating it. If you're here, you probably have easy access to it, so please go use it. And I was anticipating some questions. I think we could jump to that if we have time, but some of the things we didn't go over, mapping is a whole other thing if you're doing the sort of geographic visualization of things. Sorry, I'm not an expert on that, so I can't really give you too much other than to say, go out and look for an expert to help you, I guess. There's a concept of inclusive design, which would be making sure you're sort of covering the diversity of your community within your visual presentation. Again, I'm not an expert there, but it's something you do want to consider when you're putting pictures or other information out there. Accessibility is one. I'm actually going to let Caroline talk about it because there is something happening, I believe, at the state level if you're in Colorado that will impact us as a government agency. But unless you have...
Sure, and it's actually, I know that the legislation has been voted on to delay, but ADA accessibility. So making sure that your website PDFs are all accessible, and accessibility covers everything. It is not just, visually impaired, hearing impaired. There's actually color blindness to consider. But the good news is, it's a huge undertaking. It is something that we all have to consider when we're creating these charts and this data to present to people. But the good news is it looks like we may be getting a year delay because it is such a huge undertaking, but it's something to keep aware of. The government agencies are going to be required to make sure that any type of material that we put out to any of the community is accessible by everyone. So.
And then I forget who Al is. Oh, wait, no. AI, right? No, you can't have a presentation these days without talking about AI. All of this, a lot of this might be kind of a moot point in 2 or 3 years when you can just tell your AI to design something for you and it does it. But in general, you're the expert on your community, so you're always going to need to have some sort of contextual knowledge to be able to add in and back that up. So hopefully, I haven't seen any amazing ones, but hopefully in the next few years there is some AI tools where we can just tell it what we want and it will easily produce all the charts and everything you need in a few minutes. It'll save us a lot of time. But other than that, I don't have a lot of anything else to add on AI if there were any questions on that.
Awesome. Well, we do have about 5 minutes left and we can take on a few questions if anybody has any. Ethan, you made a good point. Alicia did make a point saying that she openly uses ChatGPT, and I agree. There's a lot of good things about ChatGPT in a way of at least formulating wording. I sometimes find myself grappling with it a little bit because I'm like, well, that doesn't really sound like me. And when you are trying to make presentations or if it's a personal thing, we have to be very careful about that. But when it comes to, sometimes when I just need to throw out a quick title and description, I throw it in ChatGPT, like help. I don't have time to think about this right now. But yeah, it would be great. And Canva actually does have kind of an AI component too, with if you're trying to create creative wording while you are designing something, it will help you in there as well. I don't know about data. I think we need to be very careful. And I think that some of our folks, especially in our data committee, who are, economists, that we have to be careful with, the pitfalls of somebody telling us what AI is telling us about the data. So any thoughts there on that, Ethan? About how, what is your philosophy, I guess is my better question.
Well, I guess in general, use any tool that's going to kind of help you do things, but I'm more of a hands-on person, so I'd rather plug in numbers myself than maybe that's old school than trust just that it's gonna pull out an insight for me, I guess.
Any questions for our speakers today? Okay. Well, then we're going to go ahead. Oh,
sorry. I do see one in the chat that was asking for the link, but we are going to share out these slides. So any of those links and sites and resources will be available that way.
That is true. Yeah, I did see that. That is so cool. that it's even out there. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And let's give our speakers a big round of applause. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all that information with our network. Again, the link and the recording and presentations, will be emailed to you early next week. And we're always working to better our delivery and timely information. So please take that 5-minute survey. That the link was dropped into the chat section. We'll also email that out to you, but please take that survey because that's what helps us bring this type of content to you. Also, don't forget that we have these upcoming events for EDCC and DCI, and we hope to see you at the Basic Economic Development course, as well as come and celebrate with us in Beaver Creek in October, the challenge program that's happening this summer. I can't say enough about the programs that DCI puts on, so don't miss out if you have an opportunity to participate. And then also, I mean, we're right in the middle of Economic Development Week. There's still time for you to tweet out, Instagram out, Facebook out, LinkedIn out your message about how important your community is and all the different types of programs that you are providing for your community and how they can tap into that. Thank you, everybody. Happy Economic Development Week, and we'll be seeing you soon.